Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's get started, inshallah. And as usual, we'll recap what we did last time around and then go over our agenda one by one. So, we practiced reactive forms a little bit more, and then we moved on to form array, which is part of reactive forms, and saw how to generate dynamically the controls that were needed on the form. And we saw how to do it in the template driven forms too, but with reactive forms we get more control, and probably that needs more practice in my opinion than template driven forms. So try to focus more on the reactive forms and its concepts, and try to come up with scenarios and try to solve them, and in the process you will gain more understanding as well as get more confident. The next thing was we tried to publish our app to GitHub pages following the directions given on the Angular.io, the official website of Angular. But we had a little glitch. Actually, it was not a glitch, it needed more time. And it was live, I believe, a minute later. Let's go ahead and have a look at how it looks like after getting published. Basically, it's the same app except that it's on a different server rather than our local machine. You have to go to the settings, and then there will be a GitHub pages section. So it says our website is live over here at this URL. All we did is uh, executed a command to build and put the output in a different folder rather than the default dist folder. So it was built in production mode at this output path. It is relative path, and make a docs folder over there, put everything or the build files in this folder. Use the base href as app1. This is case sensitive. It should mimic, or it should be exactly same as our app name. So after running this command, we saw a few files generated, bundled, minified production build files at this path, docs path, and it asks us to create a 404.html or make a copy of index.html and name it as 404 because of internal GitHub reasons. And after a minute, it was live over here. So same website. Just GitHub pages. Submit. I go back to products, and I should see that modified name. So let's move further and take care of today's stuff. We just finished this, and then we'll go and have a look at what is called a pipe, and look at the default built-in pipes that Angular provides and try to build our own custom pipe. So what is a pipe? We have actually used the pipe to load something on the UI, trying to consume an observable using async pipe. Over here. So this is how a pipe looks like. We after whatever we are trying to display, or using interpolation or something like this, we use the pipe name right after that. So what is a pipe? Pipe is just a transformation of whatever we are trying to display, whatever we are trying to actually consume. So this is an example of what is called an async pipe. But this is kind of an advanced example. Let's go to the basic example and look at what a pipe is. I'll close everything over here and try to open the files relevant to us for our topic. So let's go back to the product management and have a look at the products listing. And product listing actually just passes on the bug to the product component to display it to display its own product. So over here we have a brand name, and one of the example of pipe is, or a simplest pipe is probably an uppercase pipe. Let's run that. Oops. So what it does is it takes the product name, whatever is on the left side, and converts it as the name implies to uppercase and display it in uppercase. And so similarly, there is something called lowercase pipe. So depending on our situation, on our need, we can use one of the built-in pipes. Or if they are not enough, then we can write our own and use that. So while it builds, let's go ahead and try to have a look at the built-in pipes that Angular provides. So there is something called currency pipe, date pipe, which transforms the dates, or they are excuse me, kind of customizable in the sense that we can pass in some parameters. Say for example, for the date pipe, we can pass in a format of the date that we want to display the date in. So as we can see, there is a lowercase pipe, there is a percent pipe that takes in a number and displays a percent symbol, and trailing two decimal places. And there is a title case which converts a text into a title case and uppercase. Let's see if our project is built yet, not yet. Meanwhile, let's introduce a couple of properties for a date and a price on the product model and try to use those pipes. Price, it should be a number. And I don't know, some kind of date. Sell by date is good enough. I believe sell by, which should be of type date. As we can see, we have used an uppercase pipe for the name, so our names of our products are uppercase now. Let's have the display updated to reflect our new properties, which are, go back, I forgot already, price and sell by date. Right now we haven't initialized these two properties, most likely they will not display anything. Let's have a pipe. let's initialize those properties for first and then come back to add the pipes. I believe we were initializing them in the service. Control P, try to load the service product service.ps. P2 dot price 199. P2 dot date sell by date. So we got invalid date. Let's try to see what went wrong. The format should be something like this, I believe. I thought the other one would work too, but apparently it didn't. So for the product P1 of with the name laptop one, I'm just initializing today's date, and for the other product, I hard coded to 30th December. That's what we see over here, but we don't see in a format that probably the user would like or make sense of. So it has something like GMT plus. So if we want to get rid of that, then we can use the pipe, date pipe, date, and over here, because since this is a price, logically it would make sense to have a currency symbol right in front of it. So we can see a dollar symbol over here right in front of us, and because my location is probably or locale is still set to US, is displaying dollar, but if the location was set to a different location, like for India, it should have displayed a rupee. If it is already configured, then it would display a rupee symbol over here. Now we see a readable date or easy to read date rather than that long string that we saw earlier. So this is how we use pipes. Let's say we don't find a pipe that serves our purpose or our requirement, then we can write the pipes easily. We just have to implement one function that is called pipe transform to actually display whatever is needed. So let's go ahead and then generate a pipe, ng generate pipe. Let's create a shared module, most likely because this pipe would be shared across the application rather than a specific module. And it depends. Right now, our scenario or our vision says that this will be shared across the application, or this should be shared if needed. So let's write a mixed case pipe, which is not available via the built-in pipes. So let's run it via dry run and see what it does. So it looks good to me. And one more design pattern, or that is very common with the Angular apps is just like we have created a module or a feature module for the product management, and we have a root module that is supposed to be our root module. So similar to root module, we can have a shared module, which is not a root module, but it's supposed to be shared across all the modules as well. I mean, in other words, across the app, regardless of the module. So that's a very common design pattern, and it might make sense to put our directive that is supposed to be used across the app in that shared module. Let's see what we have in the shared folder already. We have authentication guards and all that stuff. Actually, all of them can go in a shared module. And just to reiterate, or just to kind of give you an idea what needs to be done, is we create a module, and we'll have our components, directive, pipes, and whatever is needed in that shared module would belong to that shared module. And the other modules, root or feature modules that need that shared module will just have that shared module imported via their imports array. So what I mean by that is we have imports array, right? We are importing the modules that are needed by this module, by the root module in this case. So our product management module would import that shared module too. And that what would that shared module look like? Similar to this module, in the declarations it will have all the stuff that belongs to it, and whatever it needs exported or whatever other modules need to consume, for example the pipe in our case, would be in the exports array. I don't know why we have exports array here in the first place. So this is not needed because products component is supposed to be internal to this module. So this is not right. So I will take it off. If any issue, then we'll go over it and try to analyze what went wrong and why this was needed. But let's say, for example, if this was shared module, then we would export our shared pipes, components, directives from over here. What is the directory? We'll go over in today's session, inshallah, after this. But they need to be exported to be visible outside of that module. That's where the export property comes in. That's how we use the export property, and that's what it means. It means whatever is internal to the app, if this module decides to make it public, it can do so via this exports array. And whatever is exported can only be consumable, can only be consumed by the other modules. So anyway, let's get back. We created a mixed case pipe in our root module itself. So let's open this and see what it looks like. Basically, it is another class that is exported, and we decorate it via, excuse me, a pipe decorator. And the name of our pipe is mixed case. So name will be used after the pipe symbol in our template. And it implements something called pipe transform, and that interface requires us to implement a method called transform. So we can just return something else over here. So let's return XYZ just for the demonstration purposes. I mean, whatever logic needs to be there in this pipe will go in this method, but it can be as simple as just written some text from here. So this is what we are transforming. Whatever we are coming in, we are discarding that. We are telling the template to display this instead. While it builds, let's build the logic after this return statement. And instead of writing the entire code, let me go back to my reference, and then I already coded it so that it will be easier. It will be faster, inshallah. Yeah, there is a question over here. Is it possible to export entire module? Module are exported by default. I don't know if we can keep a module private. For example, over here, we have app module, and we are importing a browser module over here. So let's see. I mean, we haven't explicitly done anything to the product management module for it to make it exportable or visible to public. Products management module. Yeah, I don't believe there is anything called private module. So it is public by default. It should be exportable. Yeah. We just saw that there is. I don't believe there is any issue with that. Okay. Anyway, let me undo that and get back to our pipe. So this is just to save time. I have already coded it, but what it does is nothing more than iterating over the array of the value coming in. I'll just leave it like that. So what I'm doing, I'm just converting that value into an array, and for every even or at every even index, I'm just converting the character to uppercase, and every odd index I'm converting the character to lowercase. There might be other better ways to actually code this, to convert even places to uppercase and odd places to lowercase, but this will do. This is easy to read, and I don't have to explain any complex logic or complex method of achieving the same thing. So this is just for our easy consumption. There might be better ways to take care of this. So now that is done, let's see if that worked. Oh, I did not add the pipe yet. So for the brand name, let's go for the mixed case. So that is not found. Actually, the pipes need to go in, I believe, in providers too. That didn't work either. We go back and apparently that didn't work. We'll come back to that to keep us moving forward. I'll take that off and then probably something will kick in my mind as to what went wrong as we move further. But anyway, this is what it is. We'll troubleshoot that in a bit, or I'll troubleshoot that later if the time doesn't permit today. And we'll go over that, over what went wrong in our tomorrow session. Okay. But logic wise, this is all it needs. Let me actually just string to. We'll come back to that, inshallah. So this was about pipe. All it takes is we have to implement this method and write our logic within this method. And the next thing we'll look at something what is called directives. Actually, we have used the directives too earlier, and one of the directives is an ngFor. Here, products component ngFor is a directive, and ngModel is a directive. And there are other directives called, for example, like ngClass. No, the module by itself, there is a question over here. I mean, you can look at the screen itself, uh, which means all of its components can be used in another module. No, they cannot be unless they are exported. So module will have visibility to other modules, but its internal stuff will not be visible unless they are exported. So that's why in a shared module, for example, the components, directives, and the pipes and other stuff that are declared and defined internally to that component need to be exported for other modules to be able to use them. Module is like a container, whatever it is visible publicly, but whatever is inside inside that container need to be exported by that container, by that module, to be able to be consumed by other modules. This is star is a shortcut for a elaborate directive for a more, I mean actually ngFor without the star is not as simple as this. So for easiness, they created a shortcut for us to be able to use in a shortcut way. And you can go to the angular.io and read more about it. Just search for attributes and then go for structural attributes. And within the structural attributes, ngFor and ngF and ngSwitch are explained more over there, and why there is a star in front of them. So in any case, I just mentioned something called structural directives. What says attribute directives? So the difference between them is structural directives actually changes the structure of the DOM. Basically, just we have seen earlier, right? We use ngFor, we just write one option over here, and depending on number of brands we have, it generates these options. If we have 10, then it will generate 10 options. So basically, adds or deletes from the structure. Similar ng for adds and ng if either adds or not add. Basically, it either changes the structure or doesn't. And similarly, ng switch. So those are structural directives and they change the structure. But other directives like ng model are defined as attributes. Something like this is an HTML attribute, right? Sorry, this is an HTML property. Yeah, this is an sorry attribute that is defined on an element. So these are attribute directives specific to Angular. So these are built-in directives, and we can write our own directives too if needed. So as a exercise, I would request you to look into something called ng class and ng style. They are pretty self-explanatory. Basically, we are trying to assign a class. Instead, if we try to use the CSS class attribute of an element, it has its limitations, and ng class provides some extra functionality over that class, over the HTML attribute. And similarly, style, there is style and there is ng style. So that was about the attributes, or that was about the directives, an overview. And let's see how we can write our own directive. Let's write something called a highlight directive. ng generate directive in the shade folder. We'll name it as highlight. And let's go to my GitHub and see what I have named over there so that I can easily hover highlight. Now our highlight is ready. So we can see a property called selector over here, and where have we seen this before is in a component. That and try to open a TS class. So we have a selector there as well. So if you look at the definition of that component, it extends a directive. So basically components are directives and they have their own template. So the attribute that we are trying to write right now is an attribute directive. It cannot have its own template. So the component is a special case of a directive, or they are called in short directives with a template. So basically it will have selector. That means if you go to any HTML page or HTML template, you can just use that directive. Our highlight directive. And we haven't written anything over here. I can refer to the directive that I have already coded. Actually, let's build it step by step. So what it needs to do is provide a file for that native element. So how to the element that it is defined on is exposed via dependency injection called element ref. Let me just type it over here instead of copying and pasting. The element that it is defined in can be obtained via this element ref. Once we inject it, we get that element. Let's just console log for now. And just have a look at what it is actually. I haven't added this on any element. Oh, I did. So I have to go to the product listing again to have a look at it. Our app isn't running yet, so let's get that started. Let me also log something called element. Basically, element ref is an Angular class, Angular interface, I believe. Yeah, it's a class. It's a wrapper over the HTML element. So to get that HTML element, we have to do element.native element, and that's how we obtain a reference to the HTML element that is wrapped, that has a definition of a directive in it. Element dot native element dot, you can style it something like this over here. So our directive is, as the name implies, on hover. We are trying to highlight that, but right now without even going for hover, we are just trying to highlight background color. Let go. Okay, it's compiled successfully. Reload that, and just like the pipe didn't work, this one didn't work either. Okay. Actually, I think I got the tag wrong. It should be how we have defined the text in the selector as. So hopefully that's the issue. That's the only issue, and it should work. And it didn't again. Our highlight. Okay, let me see if something got logged. Nothing got logged. Okay, there's pretty some basic stuff that I think I'm missing with the pipe as well as this directive, and we are unable to see live why, yeah, or how that works. So I just console log from within the constructor itself. I don't think it's getting constructed. I don't believe this is the issue, but the private element needs a this because it belongs to the class. That didn't work either. So I mean, there is something fundamentally basic that I'm missing. Uh, let's keep on going, and hopefully I will be able to resolve it within this session itself as time permits, or I'll take care of it today and then inform you what was going wrong tomorrow, inshallah. But I don't know how long can I go on without resolving this. So in any case, this is about directive, and let's go back and have a look at the validation one more time, or form validation, both on template driven forms as well as reactive forms. It's not even throwing an error, so there might be a logical error somewhere. Okay, in any way, let's keep on moving and let's go to add product page. Over here, what we did is we implemented both template driven form as well as reactive forms. But in case of any error, all we are doing is we are checking if the product name is valid. If it is not, then we are just displaying the product name is valid. We are not giving any cue to the user as to what is wrong. Right? It could be just because this field was required, or it could be just because the maximum length is 10, but the user has entered more than 10. So user will not be able to, probably will not be able to figure out what exactly is wrong, because we are not giving the user an appropriate or message accordingly. So how can that be done? And the other thing is we are using the hidden attribute and trying to assign a true or false based on this condition. And we have seen a different style of doing that too, that is using ngIf. So ngIf here. Okay. We are using hidden. I believe in edit page we are using ngIf. But anyway, this is a different design. But what is the difference when to use ngIf and when to use hidden? So probably you are aware of the difference between hidden attribute versus display none CSS property. So what hidden does is it will hide this element, but it will have the space, it will occupy the space that is required by this element. Whereas the display none CSS property doesn't display the element or hold its place at all. So that's the advantage of display none, and that's what Similarly, that's what ngIf does. It either generates the element, it's a structural directive, remember. So structural directive changes a DOM. It either ngIf either generates that element or it doesn't. So when it doesn't, there is no space reserved. So let me go change this condition back to ngIf rather than hidden. Before even changing, let's actually see it in action. Hopefully this will work without any glitches. Okay. So to display to the user the right message, what we need to do is go over after the errors property of this particular element. Errors. We use null safe operator. Basically what it means is if errors is null, don't go even further and evaluate it to false. This is an error. So on errors, and if the errors collection has an error called required, then display the message. Similarly, if the errors has an error called minimum length, so how to display the particular messages is go after this product name, which is defined as a template reference variable over here, and it exposes a property called errors. In case there are errors, this will be an array with some entries. In case there are no errors, this will be null. So that's why we are using this null safe operator. In the case that it is null, in the case that there are no errors, then this will evaluate to false. So this should be actually the negation of our check. So if it is hidden, then this is true. That means when this particular thing is true. If this is true, then hidden is false. Yep, it should not be hidden. So yep, I believe this is right. So similarly, we can go after other errors too. So right now on this one, we have just defined three validations. One is required, minimum length and maximum length. If it was, let's say, an email, then maximum length and minimum length will probably go off and we'll look at the pattern. So in that case, we'll have something called email over here rather than that minimum length. And where are these texts coming from? These are the built-in validations. And the built-in validations, in case of fail, they provide an output something like this, an object saying that required, there was a required field on this, but that validation failed. In case it passes, it returns null. It returns either null or a key value pair. That key value pair, the key of that key value pair will tell the consumer what is wrong, or gives it a key indicating or giving an indication of what's wrong. So in this case, this is required, and let's say if it was some custom validation, it will return something like this: custom is true. So based on this indication, we can display this a particular message to the user. So similarly over here, this is for template driven forms. Actually, let's look at that in action. It says right away product name is required. That is gone. Product name is less than 3 characters long. We actually change these spans to diff. So this is a little shortcut. When you select something, let's say BR, and then do a Control Shift L, it will select all the BRs, and we can modify all these occurrences in one go. Control Shift L. In this case, this is not beneficial because it's also selecting something called BR of the product brand. So it will change that too, and then we'll have to go back manually change those occurrences. But with span, I was kind of confident. Maybe I was wrong, but I was kind of confident that there will be no side effects, and hopefully they are not. So if we inspect these two elements over here, let's go ahead and do that. This is our diff. We are displaying that the product name is required, and the diff below that, product name is less than 3 characters long. It is hidden, but it it occupies its space because we are using the hidden uh, attribute rather than ngIf. So if we use ngIf, that space will be gone. Let's do the same thing for the reactive forms too. So I'll just copy and paste from there. And then we cannot go after product name because it will refer to that other template reference variable. But for reactive forms, we have defined this particular control with the name, just name, not the product name. We will have to change that. And it will pick up the required and minimum length and maximum length and so on from what we have defined in the component class for that reactive form. So over here for the name, we have enabled the same 3 validators, but via a component rather than in the template itself. Right. So name is not internal to this particular group. So for that we'll have to probe the group itself rather than go after that particular name. So we have seen this earlier too. This dot, the name of the product group that we have defined. This one. Dot get the control with this particular name within that particular group. So this will get that done, but let's do it in an elegant way. I'll go back to using name itself and actually expose a property called name from the component, just like we did with the tags. What did we do with the tags? So we defined a getter, which is another way of saying read-only property. We cannot write to that. So it will have only get method and we return a type of form array. Excuse me. And the code that says, okay, go in the form here and make it easy for the template or anybody else. Instead of writing this code repetitively, just expose a property called name, which would be usable by template as well as anything else that needs it. So name, this will not be a form array anymore, but it will be a form control. Name form control. So if This pattern will have to write a getter for every control that we have defined under that group. For the name, similarly for the brand, for fragile, and for the tags we already have it. Or a different way is, instead of that, expose a property called controls itself rather than each control. So it will be something like that, just like we have done with the tags. Controls, and it will be a object itself. Take that off and figure the other things later. Not a public getter, but something like this. Controls. So basically redefined, uh, instead of getting a getter, writing a getter for each control, we can just write something called a controls and then dynamically add the properties so that they can be easily referenced in the template itself. So this is another way. We just repeat the code in one place rather than having a lot of getters. As soon as we write, we add, let's say tomorrow there is a requirement to add one more property to this form, then we can easily do it in this first, right over here, and the developer will comparatively easily know that this needs to be done. And he or she need not figure out, okay, there are other places that need to be taken care of whenever something new is to be added over here. So anyway, I mean, each approach has the advantages. This is more explicit. This is little bit easy to read and more compact. So let's stick with one approach. It will just be dependent on your situation, I guess, but you can you utilize either approach. So now that we have name defined and we are not going after others, this is for demonstration purposes and we are targeting one field. We could do the same on all other fields too. So let's go back and check. So it says product. Okay, we are probably hard coding this DD somewhere. That's why it's pre-populated and it's saying the validation of the minimum length is kicking in. It's gone. So now the same situation over here. We are not using ngIf and using the hidden attribute. That's the reason it's occupying this space. Even after that validation, it should have still occupied, but I don't know why that space is gone. Check it out. Okay. Anyway, I mean, let's focus on Angular stuff rather than styling issues. So now that is taken care of, how to display a specific validation for a specific error. And let's say the built-in validators that are provided by HTML5 or Angular are not enough for our purposes. We can easily write our own validations. So how to write our own validators? Let's look at what is a validators dot minimum length in the first place. Or let's first look at the required thing because it doesn't need any input. So as we can see, all we need to do is write a function that accepts a control of type abstract control, that accepts something of type abstract control, and it returns either validation errors or null. Null in the case there are no errors or it satisfied the validation. Validation errors in case of if there were any errors. So this is the contract of the require attribute. It doesn't show any implementation over here, but this is the signature of that method. So this is what it returns as the validation errors. So basically, what is validation error? It's an array of key value pair. So basically, key is required. It says true, indicating that this error is present. Okay. So we can follow the same pattern. All we have to do is implement a function that accepts an abstract control and returns either validation errors or null. Let's utilize the same file. End of the class, after the end of the class, I'll just write an function that should be exportable. Let's write a validator. Let's build a case for this validator first. Let's go back to the add form and see a critical flaw in there. So name is required. I enter space 1, 2, 3, and the validation passed. And most likely, or I'm 99% sure that the design or our form should not be accepting empty spaces as the product name and saving them to the database. There might be other ways, but this to actually handle this scenario, but this gives us an opportunity to write our own validator function, not to accept this particular input. So what do we need to do for that is an write function similar to that required function. So let's name it no spaces validator, and it should accept control of type abstract control. What is an abstract control? It's a kind of contract for all the controls, for the form group, for the form array as well. And a particular instance within that form group is a form control, whereas the a form itself is a form group, but they all derive from abstract control. And that is the reason, and properties like valid, invalid, pristine, and all the stuff, they are defined under the abstract control, and that is the reason why we are able to see those properties on a form control as well as the form itself. Anyway, as we have seen, it should be returning validation errors or null. Must return a value. Okay, we haven't coded it yet, so let's return. We should return a key value pair. Let's return no spaces. Let's return true with that value, and wherever this is applied, it should not pass because we are not doing any logic check. We are not returning null. Instead, we are returning errors. And then we need to add that function end of the array or the validated array on the control that we need the validation on. So let's see if that works. And we did not add any error messages to that, but and let's go ahead and add that. Just because we did not add any logic, this message will always be there and it will be gone once we return as null. Basically, we are indirectly we are saying it passes every time. We are not worried about that at this point of time. Anyway, so how to check that if there are only spaces? Let me go back and then just get my code. Okay, what I'm doing over here is I'm defining a reject regular expression, and that regular expression is checking if there are spaces over here after 3 characters. And I'm testing that regular expression against the value of the control or our input and seeing if it checking if it passes that. If it does not, or if it does in our case, if we see a pattern of only spaces, then we return an error or a key value pair indicating that there is an error, otherwise we return none. It works like other things. Okay, it's getting odd. Okay, maybe there is error in our component itself or in our template itself. Name dot errors dot no spaces product name, we just spaces and okay, my indicator text is just spaces and not no spaces. So let me take care of that. Space. Okay. Now it got ticked in. Product name cannot be just spaces. Why did I have to give that 3 as an input? Let's take that off actually and see. Just have it a 1. Basically, the reason why I had three over there is we have a minimum length validation and we don't want another validation to kick in before that minimum validation passes. So for example, if the user enters space 1, probably that's good enough for the requirement of this app because it's not just spaces. And eventually we might be trimming the text to actually save it to the database or leave it like that. So anyway, the tree over there signifies that kick in this validation after the minimum length. But we are making an assumption over here that across the app, the input fields that are getting validated for no spaces will have minimum length 3. So what if there is another requirement on a different field of the database where we are required to have minimum length of 10? An example of that might be a description of the product itself. So anything less than 10 characters might not be enough to actually describe anything. So for that particular scenario, it would be best, or it would be better at least, to actually accept 3 as an input rather than assuming and hard coding 3 as the minimum length across the app, right? So how to accept that? In that particular scenario, we cannot just write a function. We have to wrap and return a function. So basically return a function with from another function, and the way to do it is something like this. So let me actually get everything out of here and go over the code. So again, we just need a function which returns another function. So if you look at it from this point on, it's the same code as here. This, so the function that we are returning, it accepts a form control. It returns a validation errors or null, just like here. And the logic is the same, except we are passing in a parameter called num rather than assuming 3. And this particular function should return a class called validator function. So I'll import that validator function in this file, and we'll just go to the definition and have a look at it. It's an interface that returns a valid, again it returns a function that returns validation errors or null. So now with this one, we will be able to give an input to that particular custom validator. So now it will be, instead of just no spaces of 2, and then a number. Let's give it a 5 and then see if that is working with 5. So in other words, what it means is that no spaces validation should kick in after we enter 5 characters, not just 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That didn't work. We'll figure it out. 5. Okay, again I need to change this no spaces. Instead of that, let me change the key to just spaces and use that particular key. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So since our minimum length is 3, let me go back actually, just make it 3. And leave it at that. This was, I mean, for the just reactive forms. Will it work for the template driven forms? It will not work because template driven forms for custom validation needs us to do something extra. So the function that we would be using will be the same, but we'll have to implement a directive for that purpose. So basically, in other words, we are controlling the validation from the component which is a TypeScript class, and for that TypeScript class all we needed is to pass in another function in the validators array for the validation to kick in. But with template driven forms we don't have that luxury, and we have to use the template itself or the HTML itself to provide that validation. And the way the template driven form work is through directives. So we'll have to write a directive for our custom validation to be able to be applied on the template driven forms. And that is the reason we went over the directives first. Today, so that we can look at the custom validation. Return spaces, true spaces. Okay, let's open the function itself and then go over it. So our custom validation or invent validation, what it is supposed to return is something called validation errors eventually. For functions that needs an input from the template, we need a validator function, but in turn it actually returns a validation errors object. And what is a validation error object? It's a key value pair. Okay, the key over here suggests that there is an error with respect to spaces, or I can just make it spaces 1, but I have to use the same key in the template for it to be able to be used. Okay, so earlier from the code I copied from my GitHub, I used in my other application as no spaces, but I forgot that I had used that specific key, that I have used only spaces and not no spaces. So that's why I went ahead and added no spaces key to my form over here at the bottom. So that key is just should be consistent across the function that is returning the error and the places where we are using them. That's all it is. Probably because of my changing them couple of times you got confused, but that's all it is. It's pretty simple. Whatever the key is written is supposed to be consumed by the caller. It should be easily spaces 1, and all I have to do is go over here and make it spaces 1 or anything else, some key. You got that? That will just work. Yeah, I hope it's clear. Nothing to get confused. Actually, I even initially I got confused with this. The key over here can be anything, whatever the developer has defined, and wherever it is consumed, it's consumed with the same key. So if there are errors with this key, then we display this message. Yeah. So let's write the directive, and again we'll use the Angular CLI. Directive shared and no spaces, because we want to utilize the same custom validation functionality on our template driven forms too. let me get that application started and we'll walk through this directive. So again, we have seen as in other directives that was not working unfortunately today, which I'll take it as a homework and fix it and let you guys know what was going wrong. But anyway, let's move on. So directive, we are utilizing directive to call our application and get our custom validation done. I'll just copy the code from my GitHub. We have seen how directive works. We have seen how to write a function. So all we need is just spaces directive, just integrating it. Instead of just copying, let's go over this. Let me write that code so that it becomes clearer step by step. So the first thing it needs to do is, or in my opinion, the first thing, it needs to implement the validator. Will utilize the Visual Studio Code's ability to actually do it for me. Or even if there wasn't that ability, what we need to implement is this particular method. So validate based on some logic. And this method accepts a control of type abstract control. Once we have this, all we need to do is call that no spaces function. That's all it does. So it calls no spaces, providing it the value. I mean, this is for accepting an input or the number and then acting upon it. But right now we are just writing without that number as an input. So all it needs to be is something like this. This dot. There is no this over here. We need the no spaces from the other file. No spaces, and then we are not passing. We have to pass the control. And we just return whatever is returned from that function. That's all it is. When we don't have to accept any input from the calling, from the places where this is called. It might be template or it might be a component class itself. So anyway, this is all it is. And then we take this no directive selector and put it on top of, put it as a directive on our control that needs this validation. There is one more step that needs to be done, and which is this. So now we'll just add the imports first. I think I missed an S, but that is fine. We'll try to fix that later if time permits, but this is just a cosmetic thing. We'll probably keep it like this. So what we need to do as an extra step, or step 2, or probably this is step 1 itself, is inject our custom validation into something called ng validators, so that the Angular framework can pick this directive up as a validator and help us use it as a custom validation. So you can even just copy and paste this line as a reference. In other words, what it means is if somebody asks for ng validate or somebody asks for no space directive, look in the ng validators, and we are trying to inject that into this ng validators array or injection token. and use existing, and it has actually we'll go over this probably in our next session. We don't have enough time. I think we'll have to go back to the providers concept. We have to step back and go over the providers concept and have a look at what this is what provide means, and what is use existing versus what use new is in our next session, inshallah. So we'll leave it over here, and we'll try to go further in our validation of accepting an input on and validating on template driven forms as well. So right now we are not accepting that input. We'll look at the demo of this as well as accepting an input. Okay, till then, inshallah, keep practicing. We'll meet tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.